Today we are covering the emotional drivers behind OCD, or Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. For each individual, exactly how they do OCD and the triggers for their particular behaviors will be different. And even though OCD often emerges in adulthood, we almost always find the primary drivers in the past. Remember, our body is not against us. Our bodies are for us. If our body has an ailment, pain, or disease, it serves us to listen to it and find out what it has to say. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, download. It really helps us continue to create all this great content for you and others, and it lets us know if we're meeting the needs of our community. So OCD is a coping mechanism and a skill that is learned to process and deal with stimuli. Though a diagnosis of OCD is usually pretty deep into that skill, many people deal with earlier signs and behaviors without having a full-blown diagnosis. So in sort of layman's terms, OCD is the repetitive action of certain things compulsively. So compulsively meaning you feel like you can't not do it. And things are done over and over and over again. It can be, there's so many ways that this manifests. And so, we kind of typically know the hand washing, the flipping on and off of light switches, the locking and unlocking of doors. That's sort of typical ones. But through the people that I've worked with the OCD over the years who are doing OCD, it can manifest in many, many, many different ways. And again, it's important to realize that this is a way that the body is dealing with stimuli. It's not doing something necessarily wrong. It's just, this is the way that it has learned to deal with some of these things that it didn't feel able to deal with prior. So let's get into that. OCD has its roots in nervous system dysregulation. And that usually comes from an intense feeling of, or perception of being unsafe, or a need to control. Anxiety is a very common precursor to OCD, which from a mind change lens makes sense. Anxiety was the body's first line of communication. And over time, when it wasn't sufficiently listened to or dealt with, then behaviors escalate to include OCD. Now, of course, not everyone who does anxiety will develop OCD. So where is that tipping point, right? So that's where we get into the very specific drivers for OCD. So one of the first main macro drivers for OCD is intense negative thinking. You may have a belief, a deep belief that your surroundings and or the people around you are in some kind of danger. And because you have lived in a heightened state of fight, flight, or freeze for so long, then your barometer becomes a little bit maladaptive. So over time, even the smallest things can feel very dangerous to the system of someone doing OCD. It may be very difficult for you to objectively and accurately view yourself because you have been repressing and avoiding for so long. So it's very common for someone doing OCD that when you get into doing something about it, first of all, even the recognition that this may not be the best coping mechanism, or that there's even something that someone is doing that might not be normal or might not be really actually serving the person, is a big step in and of itself. For people doing OCD, their world has become so small, it's hard for them to see outside of that. But then another thing is any perceived responsibility or blame in that situation feels like another threat. And remember, the threat detection system is a bit off. So for someone doing this to feel like they're being threatened by the suggestion that they may have something to do with it creates a large response, which then just makes the person want to do the compulsions over to get a little bit of sense of safety. So it's a vicious cycle because in essence, it doesn't feel safe to see what needs to change or figure out ways to change it. So to stay safe, you will avoid, right? But of course, that just causes a buildup in the emotions that cause you to act out with the obsessive or compulsive behaviors. Now, the very act of resisting a compulsion brings anxiety, which then starts the cycle over again. So this repetitive cycle makes the world of an OCD sufferer so very small. So small that what they end up focusing on very literally is on what is in front of them and what is the direct stimuli in front of them at all times. So they become trapped. Now, all of this comes from a very dysregulated childhood environment. The age in which the OCD starts being the way to cope with the trauma often is the age in which your emotional development will stop. So though you age physically, you remain frozen physiologically. You are, in effect, stuck in this cycle, reliving the trauma over and over each day until it's finally resolved. That's why the behaviors are repetitive. Now, it's not like someone is rehearsing the trauma consciously in their mind every day. In fact, oftentimes people who do OCD don't even know that there was a trauma or they're not aware of what it is. So it's not like they're consciously repeating that, but it is physiologically, psychologically repeating in the mind. And that's what's causing these outward behaviors. So this might come because you grew up in a childhood or a household that was very controlling, strict, or perceived to be perfectionistic. Things may have been very unpredictable or unstable. Now, this could be because there were mood swings or emotional dysregulation of the adults in the home, or even literal instability through maybe moving, like constantly moving from state to state or house to house or environment to environment, or even a frequent upheaval of school situations. So all of that can be perceived as instability that can really affect particular children and particular people in a way that drives the OCD later in life. It's possible that your parents, and this one's interesting, after having worked with quite a few people with OCD, I saw a trend that there were a particular group of people whose parents held either high profile or high intensity jobs where there was a lot of focus on accountability. So this would have been that the parents may have been subconsciously hyper vigilant about what was going on around them or what they were perceived to be like. And that then, whether it was spoken or even overtly done, a child would have caught this and picked up on this and made a belief about themselves about that. So even as a child, you may have witnessed or even perceived a lot of pressure on your parents to perform or achieve in a certain way. It's possible that they may have been attacked publicly or punished by authority figures when you were a child. And again, even though you were not the target, you would have felt the threat of upheaval or the threat of consequences put upon your parents. And as a child, you subconsciously would have maybe taken on the role of getting it right, almost for your parents, as a way to deflect criticism or the verbal attack that your parents were getting. So if you're doing the OCD later in life, you're still trying to get it right through the compulsions. This could also happen if a parent or an older sibling was held responsible for a major accident that resulted in the injury or death of another. I remember working with someone who was doing OCD and tracking back to their father had accidentally shot and killed his brother as a child. And so through that process, there was the parent who held so much responsibility for an accident that had happened and had not been properly processed and integrated, that the child then internalized a lot of that same guilt and shame. And the OCD was a manifestation of that even in the second generation. It's also possible that your home environment was a place of criticism or verbal attacks or a lot of perfectionistic speaking, and that would have been directed at the children, or it could have been directed from one parent to another one of the parents. And what this does is it undermines the basic safety structure of what a home is meant to be. Because if you never know when an attack is going to happen, or even what a result might be, if there was threat or fear, or if eventual divorce, or if there were big fights or angry outbursts or threats happening, then what that does is it destabilizes the home environment for a child. And it would have left your little body on constant high alert, which is what we spoke about before, which kind of puts that system into overdrive. Now, because your home base was so out of control, you would have hyper-focused on the little things that you could control. So repeating a behavior over and over again and getting the same result, that actually helps release endorphins that release stress. And so that may have been the only form of stability that you as a child had, was if I do this, then this. You're looking for consistency. You're looking for, I can rely on something. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. And that takes the place of the needed safety structure in the home. Unfortunately, what happens is an addiction forms to the hits that you get from the stress-reducing chemicals. This can also be triggered by high-stress school environments. So in a school environment where performance outcomes or adherence to the rules become the perceived focus, then a child can become very dysregulated by all of the different reactions by the different children in the classroom. And it can feel very unsafe when other children act out or don't follow the rules. So what's happening is, even if it's not you as the child that, is acting out or, doing something, but other children are, you can take that in and feel very dysregulated. It can feel very unsafe at school. And even though a consequence or something might be happening to another child, if you internalize that, it again destabilizes something that was meant to be a stabilizing environment. Now, this can be even further compounded if the acting out of the children in the classroom dysregulates the teacher, and then the teacher's emotions escalate. So if there's anger or yelling, or the teacher becomes dysregulated in some way, that can feel very destabilizing to a child. So to stay safe, the child becomes hyper-focused on performing a few tasks over and over again to create the safe, predictable outcomes that they need to feel safe and stabilized in their own bodies. In very authoritarian households, children may have been punished and or isolated, maybe through timeouts, or the punishment could have been corporal punishment, so physical punishment, which communicated to the child that the child was not right or not good. Even in environments where a parent may have said, what you did was wrong, and then they were punished for it, It's difficult for children to separate out behavior from being. And so that causes children to believe that they are not good and that their behaviors are not good, and therefore they are inherently not trustworthy. And so they become insecurely attached within themselves. So again, the repeating of the behaviors and the achieving known outcomes becomes a small way, and maybe sometimes the only way, that they trust themselves. Now, OCD can occur quite suddenly in someone who witnesses or experiences a major trauma in which they perceived helplessness. So this could be witnessing a death, an accident, or another traumatic event where you felt like you were unable to move or do anything to help or prevent it. And the OCD is moving you into constant action that you felt like you were not able to take at the time. So it's the body's way of trying to discharge the emotional energy and process the trauma that was built up during that time. The thing is that the behaviors and the compulsions don't actually process the trauma. In fact, they keep the person in the cycle. So left unprocessed and unintegrated, the behaviors just continue over and over and over again, and then will increase. The compulsions and behaviors will often increase over time. Now, it's important to understand that the compulsions are actually serving you in the best way that they can. Unless the original traumas can be accessed and resolved, it's very difficult to see progress with someone dealing with OCD. But when the drivers behind the behaviors are addressed, then the compulsions tend to resolve rather quickly. See, the brain and the body are very efficient. If there is no good thing coming from a behavior, subconsciously or consciously, that serves us in any way, it becomes a waste of valuable energy. And the body does not like to waste valuable energy. It takes an enormous amount of emotional and mental energy to do OCD. And when those energies are properly released, because the trauma cycles have been processed and integrated, then what you get from that is an incredible resource of energy to draw from to begin creating something new. Like with most things, the way out of this condition is going inside the body, inside the mind, inside the subconscious programming, to help us understand and listen and hear the very good reason that these conditions developed. So what we're going to go after is those initial received or perceived messages from parents or caregivers or foundational systems that children were exposed to that communicated a lack of support or safety. When we rewrite and rewire those messages, then we can input something different there. We can reset those systems to safety, to peace, and rewire that signaling system back to signaling when there is actual danger, and letting the rest go by as just input and stimuli. In the end, our goal is always going to be to put the power back where it belongs, which is back inside of you. And that means you will be the biggest support for you. As always, I look forward to seeing you every other week to dive into this fascinating topic. Please make sure to continue to leave those 5-star reviews and comment if there's a disease, symptom, or ailment you would like for us to cover. And until next time, thanks for joining us on the Mind Change Podcast, where we are changing the world one mind at a time.